In this video, we enable Windows AD SMB Access for Azure Files. Hello everyone. SMB Access for Azure Files with Azure Active Directory Domain Services has been in GA for a while, but only recently went into public preview with Windows Active Directory. Hold on a second. If that didn't make any sense to you, that's okay. Microsoft has 3 different directory services with Active Directory in the name. Check out my video on the differences between Azure AD, Windows AD, and Azure AD Domain Services if you're unclear about the difference. I'll post a link above. Moving on, one of the first challenges I ran into with Azure services is moving a large number of files into Azure Storage. This was years ago, and Azure Storage didn't have all the options that are available today. I figured, let's just copy the files to blob storage. That's when I started to truly learn the difference between traditional compute services and cloud services. Fast forward a couple years, and now Azure Storage offers file services along with blob storage, table storage, and static websites. I have another video that goes over Azure Storage if you're interested. Again, link will be above. Azure File Storage now offers the ability to use traditional NTFS style permissions based on your on-premises Windows AD domain. This is an awesome addition because you can finally start to extend file services to Azure. I should point out that this is a preview feature at the time of this recording. This is part 1 of a 2-part video. In this video, we set up Azure Files for SMB Access with Windows AD. The second part goes over how to extend that service to your on-premises network and secure it. Before we get started, please take a second to subscribe, click the bell icon, and if you enjoy these videos, click the like button. Seeing the subscription count go up makes these days of social distancing just a little bit more pleasant. I have a home lab connected to an Azure VNet with a VPN. This would be similar if using ExpressRoute. I also have a domain controller at each location. In the demo coming up, we're going to add the storage account, add a file share to that account, and then enable SMB file security on that share. Adding a file share is not new to Azure Storage, but enabling NTFS style permission to it is. This provides access similar to file servers deployed in a Windows domain. Let's review how this works because you can't join a storage account to a domain like you could a server. I'm going to stick with just the Azure portion for now. Notice that both the VM client and domain controller are in the same VNet, and note that the client VM is domain joined. We can extend this to the on-premises VMs, but for now we're sticking to the Azure VNet. Microsoft provides a script to enable SMB access for Azure Files. When we enable SMB access, the script adds a computer or user object that will represent the storage account in Windows AD. The storage account gets a Kerberos key used to validate tokens. When a user on the domain join client accesses the storage account, the request is sent to the domain controller to get a token. If the user is authenticated, a Kerberos token is returned and the user uses that to access the file share. The token is validated at the storage account. You may have noticed that we can use either a computer or user object to represent the storage account in Windows AD. Why use one over the other? I couldn't find much information on this. They both work equally as well. The only difference I found is how passwords are treated. Because the Azure file account is represented as a computer user object in Windows AD, a password policy is likely to apply. If the password expires, authentication will fail. You could override this by using a user account and setting the password to never expire, or add the account to an OU that doesn't enforce a password policy. I'm not a security expert, but neither of those sound like a good idea. The third option is to use the Update AZ Storage Account AD Object Password command that's part of the AZ Files Hybrid module to create a new password before it expires. We'll step through that in the demo. It needs to run inside the domain and could be easily scheduled to automate the process. If you don't have automation in place, check out my series on Azure Automation. This could be scheduled on a hybrid worker that runs inside your domain. Task Scheduler would also work. Although Azure Files with SMB permissions behave like a traditional file share, there are differences. There are 3 different types of permissions used to control access to Azure Files. The first is at the share level. Unlike your on-premises file server, Azure Files uses RBAC roles at the share level. These identities must originate from Windows AD and replicate to Azure AD using AD Connect. This only applies to the share, not all directories or files in that share. Next is the root directory and file permissions in the share. These are protected with traditional NTFS access like your on-premises servers. After we set up the new file share, no NTF permissions exist, so no one can access the share. Well, that would be the case if it wasn't for the super user access. This access uses the storage account key to mount the file share for the first time, then we can create root level file access using NTFS. The share has to be mounted on a computer on the domain so we can add NTFS permissions to users on the domain. The process we follow in the demo is to create the share and set the permissions, mount the share with the storage account key, set the root directory permissions. Once that's all done, mount the share as a normal user and use it. Let's jump in and walk through this. The demo will start by adding a new storage account and a share. Then we work through the steps listed on the screen. At the end, we'll run the command to change the password. Here I am at the Azure portal, and the first thing I'm going to do is create a storage account. So to do that, I'm going to go to Create a Resource and type in Storage. From here, I'll select Storage Account and Create. I'll create a new resource group, and I'll call it Azure File RG01. I'll give the storage account a name, CIR File Test 01. I'll select a location. My location is Central US. You can select whatever you need. For performance, I'm going to leave it as standard. If this was a production, I may consider the premium, but for this test, I'm just going to leave it as standard. Leave the account as a storage v2, and I'll change the replication to locally redundant storage. Next, I'll select networking. We'll do more with this later, but for now, I'm just going to leave it to public endpoints. Under advanced, I'm going to leave everything as default. Notice there is the ability to add large file share support. I don't need that for now, so I'm just going to move on to next, and then review and create. And I'll create. We'll give this a minute to finish. The deployment's complete. I'm going to go to the resource. Now that I'm in the storage account, I'm going to create a file share. So I'll add a share. I'll call this SMB test. And I don't need any quota for it, so we'll do create. That's the first part, is creating the storage account and the share. Right now we have a share, but you can't access the share using SMB or NTFS style permission. So let's set that up. To set up the SMB access, I'm going to log into a VM that's both on the VNet and joined to the domain. So let's open up ISE. I don't have code on this yet. I'm going to run this as administrator. As part of this, I have to import some modules. So I need elevated permissions to do that. We're going to download and run a script that Microsoft provides that will give us the commands to join that storage account to the domain. The user running that script will need some permissions to be able to do this. The account used to run this script, it has to be replicated to Azure AD. So this is going to be an account that's sourced from Windows AD and replicated to Azure AD with AD Connect. It has to have rights to modify AD to add a user or computer object. And that account also has to have storage owner or contributor rights. The account I'm using, I set up just for this. It's both a domain admin and a global admin. So that gives me all the permission I need, but you can definitely scale that back in production if you don't want to give it full domain and global admin rights. Let me just clear that out. Next, let's download the script. So I'm going to go into IE, and I'll include the link to this in the video. It's a GitHub repo that Microsoft has with the location of the script. There's a few different versions of it. I'm going to download the most recent, which is version 0.1.2. We'll just save it and open a folder. I'm going to close this out too. So I'll extract this zip file. We can leave it right where it's at. You'll notice there's two files in here. One's a PowerShell script and the other one's a module file. And then there's a copy to PS path. The copy to PS path file just copies these two scripts to where they need to be. So let's get this underway. The first thing I'm going to run is a command to set the execution policy to unrestricted for this current user. Once that's done, I'm going to run the copy to PS path script. So to do that, I need to get into the download directory. So that's where it's located. Then I can just run this. I'll make all these commands available on my blog if you want to follow along. Next, I'm going to import the AZ file hybrid module. That finished, the next thing I'm going to do is connect to my Azure account. And again, this account has global admin rights, but the account you use has to have a minimum of storage account owner or contributor rights to that storage account. Now I'm connected to my Azure account, and the next thing we need to do is set up some variables. We're going to set up the subscription ID, resource group name, and storage account name. So I'll add my resource group name and my storage account name. And don't forget to add your subscription ID. I already have that set as a variable. I'm going to leave that blank. Just makes editing later a little bit easier. And then let's make sure we're in the correct storage account. We'll do that with select AZ subscription and set it to the subscription ID. Okay, so I ran that and I'm on the right subscription. Now that that's all set, let's run the command. And let me just go through what this is doing. The command is join AZ storage account for auth. We've got the resource group name, and we already have that set in a variable. We have the storage account name set in a variable as well. Domain account type. This can either be a computer account or a service login account. I'm going to set it to service login account. And again, the only real difference with this is how passwords are treated. At least that's all I could find. So we have two options for organizational unit name. This is the OU that the computer user object will be placed into. You can simply specify a name, or you can give it a distinguished path. If you use the organizational unit name, let's say you have an OU called file server and you wanted to go there. If you only had one OU called file server, that would work fine. But if you had multiple OUs with the same name, it's just going to pick the first one. So I think I'd rather give it the distinguished name so it goes exactly where I expect it to. I'll just pull these out. Now that that's all set, the last thing to do is to run it. So it looks like we got a confirmation here that it's enabled. There's a couple other commands we can run to verify it's working. First, we'll get the storage account. That gets the storage account we created and adds it as a variable. And then if we go to the storage account properties of the Azure File Identity Based Auth Directory Service options, we can see it's set to AD. And the last command here is Azure File Identity Based Auth Active Directory Properties. And there it is. So we can see it is part of my domain. Let's also look at AD. Here I am in Active Directory Users and Computers. I'm going to go to my domain and go to the Azure Files Share. That's the OU I used. And you can see I have two objects here. One is the CIR file test 01 user account that we just set up. I set up the one above it previously using the computer account. And I'll just point out if we go into properties, we have a small set of properties, the basics for any computer account. If I go into this one that we just created, it's a user, so we can go into account. And one of the things I notice is passwords set to never expire. So I'm not sure if this is something that's changed on the most recent version of the script, if that's supposed to be there, if it's not. Anyway, just pointing that out, that is an option when you use the user account. Okay, but that is in AD now. The user account used to manage Kerberos information when a client accesses the resource. Let's go back to the portal and add the RBAC roles to the file share. Here I am in the storage account. I'm going to go to File Shares and pick the file share we just set up and go into Access Control. I'm going to add some role assignments. First, I'm going to select a role, and I want to point out a couple roles down here. There's Storage File Data SMB Share Contributor. This has modify rights to the share. Then we have Storage File Data SMB Share Elevated Contributor. That has modify rights as well as rights to change the permissions. And then we have a reader role. So I'm going to start with a reader and look for some groups that I had set up previously. So here's my AZ file reader group. You can see I have 3 groups here, one for elevated contributor and one for contributor. These groups are replicated from Windows AD. This access that I'm setting up only needs to be created once. Then membership can be managed in the Windows domain by adding or removing users from these groups. Remember, by default, Azure AD Connect synchronizes every 30 minutes. So if you make a change, you either have to wait 30 minutes for that replication to take place or initiate an AD Connect synchronization. I'm going to add another. I'll do contributor this time. And the third one, this is the reader. This is equivalent to adding share permissions on a folder. Next, we'll add NTFS permission to the directory structure. And to do that, we need to go back to the computer. To configure NTFS permissions, we have to use a super user access. So I'm going to build out that command now. So first we have to set a drive letter. This is a simple net use command. I'm just going to make this Y. Then we need the storage account name. I'll just pull that from up here. And it's also needed at the end of this command. I need the share name and the storage account key. So I think I can remember SMB test. I'm going to grab the access key. Just copy that to the clipboard. That is SMB test. I'll paste in the key. Okay, but don't run it from here. I'm going to copy this. The reason I'm not going to run it from this PowerShell session is because I ran it with elevated permissions. I won't be able to see the drive path if I run it here. So I'm just going to open up the command prompt as a normal user and run it. Now if I go back to File Explorer, you can see I have the new drive mounted. I'm going to go to the properties of this and go to Security and start modifying some of the security settings. So we'll go to Edit. And I'm going to add a reader role, a contributor role, and an administrative role. So let's do the reader first. That has read and execute, list, and read. And again, I'm using groups for this. We'll do contributor next. I'm going to give this account modify rights in addition to the read. I'm going to add a third one now. This will be the elevated contributor, and that's going to have full control. It's going to tell me that if you're setting this at the folder, it's going to change everything. That's fine. There's no subfolders, so I'll click OK. And OK. Mounting the share with the storage key only needs to be done once. Now that I have the NTFS permissions, I can go in as one of the users in the full control group and modify permissions as I need to. Let's do net use Y, and we'll delete that. So all the permissions are set, all the users are created. Let's give it a try. Here I am logged in to a machine that's domain joined and on a VNet in Azure. I'm just going to open up PowerShell ISE. I'm using this as a normal user this time. Now I'm going to use the net use command to mount the share. Okay, that completed successfully. Now we can go into the N drive and we can create folders and files. Let's just set up a couple. And I'm going to go into test 3 and we can modify the properties. You can go into security. We can disable inheritance. Maybe just add the user. Give that one user full control. So as you can see, it works just like Windows file server permissions from this point on. Let's go into test 2 and we'll create a new document. Okay, so that's all working. Let's log in as a different user. I'm going to log in as a user with contributor rights. And we'll log into ICE again. And I'll just run the net use command. There it is. And you can see our folders are there. If I try to go into test 3, I don't have permissions. I can go into test 2 and open up documents. And I can't go into test 3 because I set that so only test 3 user 3 has full control to that folder. So let's try the third option. This is the user with read-only access. We can mount the directory, and we should see it in here. Again, I can't go into test 3. I can go in here. If I try to edit it, I don't have permissions. So that all works as expected. Let's go back to the admin account we started with because we have one more thing to do. We're going to change the password on the account we use to enable Kerberos authentication. To do that, we're going to use the update AZ storage account AD object password command. For resource groups, because I still have the session running, I can just do $resource group. And the storage account name, I already have that again set as a variable. If you don't, you can just add your resource group name and storage account name. And again, what I'm doing is something similar to a storage account key rotation. And it's going to give me a warning, and I'll do yes to all. This will use the Kerberos keys to update the password on the Windows AD object. Remember, if the password expires on that object, users will not be able to authenticate to the file share. I'm now on a server that's in my home lab, connected to the VNet with a VPN. And I'm going to try to connect to that share. Notice it failed with a network path not found error. If I do an NS lookup on that host name, I should be able to get a response. So it can find the IP address, but I'm still getting that network path not found. That's because the way it's configured so far, This will only work on the VNet in Azure. In my next video, I'll go over how to fix that so it can be used over a VPN or express route. That's it for the video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to get notifications when my next video comes out. Thanks for watching.